Oh, I tell you, I felt pretty good starting the day today, but I feel so much better seeing all of you this morning. Isn't it a wonderful thing that we get to do? I just love this. I and this is such, an interesting weekend, this holiday weekend. It's really gotten me thinking about this idea of freedom. And I know this holiday, when I was growing up, it was about barbecue, family, and little fireworks we'd put out in the street that would go and I had a really different experience of the 4th of July when we were back in Missouri by Unity Village, studying and working there. And we lived in this neighborhood real close to Unity Village where there were people who were putting on basically what I thought of as professional fireworks show, like right in the street in front of their homes. One of them right next door to us, another one up the block, another one the next block back, and then the next. And it was wild. I had never seen such a thing. And it was exciting. But boy, you could feel the percussion of the explosions around you. And I thought, oh, we're gonna, we came back to California. We're moving back to California. Everything will be calm again. It's like, well, not necessarily so. It's feeling more and more like the Midwestern celebration all the time. But and we all know, July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was signed, and they wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." And just taken on its face, that is a wonderful affirmation of personal freedom. And yet we also know that it did not represent freedom for everyone. The Native American population here faced a century of genocide. And if we had not declared independence from Britain, slavery would have been abolished here like it was in England in 1833. And wouldn't that have changed the lives of a lot of people? There's a whole lot of things about our founding fathers I don't feel great about. But one of the things I do feel good about was their views on religion. Now, they had very different views on religion. And it doesn't always come across that way in history, the way the generic form of history we get. But they saw things very differently. And they knew that they all wanted to have the freedom to practice whatever their spiritual beliefs were in whatever they wanted to. And thank goodness that they were sure about that. And they plugged that into the founding documents of this country, because that created a fertile field for people to think the way they wanted to think and discern things the way they wanted to discern them. And it was out of that came what we know as today as the Transcendentalist movement. And one of the powerful teachings of the Transcendentalist movement was that Christ within, that divinity within, whatever you call it, that thing within us that guides us, some of us call it intuition, that was the supreme way to have new insights revealed to us. Well, it was in studying the work of the Transcendentalists when they both lived in Denison, Texas, that Charles and Myrtle Fillmore met each other. And naturally, those ideas from the Transcendentalist movement have been brought forward in Unity. I really appreciate one of the books. I mean, there's so many good, wonderful books we get out of Unity, but one of the first ones I bought was the one, The 12 Powers from Charles Fillmore. And I loved the chapter he wrote about this inner knowing. And he called it spiritual understanding, that it's one of those faculties that's always operating in our life. And, it's basically, he's talking about that intuition. And I'd only heard of intuition before as women's intuition. But Charles is saying, no, this is not just about women. This is everybody, that we have this thing within us. And in fact, he talks about Professor Albert Einstein in that chapter. And he quotes him saying, "Every man knows that in his work, he does his best and accomplishes the most when he has attained a proficiency that enables him to work intuitively. That is, there are things we come to know so well that we do not know how we know them." Isn't that a great definition for intuition? Knowing without knowing how we know it. I love that. And he tells a story about Professor Einstein there too. He talks about a time when the professor was working so hard on this one particular problem for 4 years that he was neglecting sleeping and eating, and he got really sick. And the doctor was called, and the doctor said to him, "You must not get out of bed. You must not stand on your feet for a long time." And Professor Einstein said, "Is this the will of God? I think not. The voice of God is within us. And God is telling me I must get up and play the piano every day. I will get up and play the piano every day, and I will stay in bed the rest of the time. This I will accept as the will of God." And I thought, man, Professor Einstein, and knowing that and letting that guide his healing, and he did heal, and going on to do so much more than he had even done before. That inner knowing, that Christ, that divinity, it can guide us in our lives to a freedom that we wouldn't otherwise have. I really appreciated the story of a young man that I heard some years ago. I was honored to get to attend one of my niece's graduation from California State University in Fullerton. And this young man, his name is Rahula Latif, and he was one of the speakers at the graduation that day. He had grown up, first part of his growing up, in Afghanistan. And he had moved here with his family 2 weeks after 9/11. And that he didn't know the language. The culture was shocking and strange to him. But there was also a lot of fear about his own personal safety and the safety of his family every day. And he was beaten up a lot. He caught it from every direction, and people were saying mean things to him and disparaging him and telling him all kinds of stuff about himself. And deep down within, he knew that wasn't true. But boy, there was this one bully who was just the worst, who hurt Rahula with his fists, but also with his words. And this bully was always telling Rahula, "You can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do that. Can't, can't, can't." And those can'ts really did haunt Rahula for much of his life. But he kept tapping into that inner knowing and going back to that place of knowing he was capable of quite a lot and that there were important things for him to do in the world. And coming up to this graduation ceremony where he was one of the graduates and where he was a speaker because he was the president of the Student Association of the biggest university in California, he was feeling pretty good about his life and himself. And one day he had to go to the market. There was a corner market near where he lived, and he had to get some milk and stuff. And so he was in line to get his things. And all of a sudden he heard a voice behind him. And it was the voice of that bully. And all of a sudden, he felt like that little kid where he was just shrinking inside himself. But then he remembered that, no, that's not who I am. I am much more than what other people think I am or what they say I am. And he turned around and he faced that bully. And the bully recognized him. And Rahula was struck by how that other young man looked. He looked really scruffy and like he had just really had a rough go in life. He didn't, unkempt, and he had his arms full of diapers and formula and like he was struggling to hold it all together. But he recognized Rahula and he congratulated him on his success because he had heard about it. And soon it was Rahula's time to step up and pay for his groceries. And in that moment, he knew deep down there was something he needed to do. And he paid for the groceries of the young man behind him. And that young man, when he realized what was going on, he got a little defensive. He says, "Why are you doing this?" And Rahula said, "Do you remember all those times you told me I can't?" And he saw the young man bristling and like this really awful look on his face. And Rahula, and the young man said, "Well, yeah, what about it?" And Rahula said, "I'm doing this because I can." Knowing what's within us, knowing what we can do, and acting on that is a powerful way to express our freedom. There's another woman whose story really inspires me in how she's put this truth into action. Her name is Michelle Howard. And she was born in Colorado in 1960. And she was born into a military family. Her dad served, and she had a happy life. Her family really instilled in her the values of hard work and taking action to make things better, and education too. And in her earliest time at school, she was 5 years old. One day, someone said something to her that sent her home crying. And she ran into her dad's arms. He was there. And she told him that someone had called her the N-word. And he kind of drew back from her. And he said, "Honey, I need to tell you this is something that you're going to have to deal with." And he kind of stopped comforting her. And she didn't tell him how she felt after that. But in later years, as she experienced more of that same kind of thing, she realized that she'd need to find a way. She'd need to follow the thing down within her that told her she had value and that she could do so much more than what the other people around her thought. When she was 12, her brother was going into the military. And she knew she wanted that for herself too. In fact, what she wanted was to join the Navy and go into the Naval Academy at Annapolis, Maryland. She soon found out. Someone was very quick to tell her, "They don't let women in there. You can't." And that just strengthened her resolve, because she knew she was going to do that someday. And she just worked and worked and worked to be ready for the opportunity. And she was one of the first to graduate from a co-ed class at Annapolis, Maryland. She was given very difficult assignments in the Navy. It was not an easy path. People did not want her to succeed. They had all kinds of ideas about her. And she continued to prove them wrong again and again and again. And when the military opened up to allow women to be in combat and to fly fighter jets, she signed up. She was there for Operation Desert Shield, Operation Desert Storm, and she continued to be promoted within the ranks again and again. And she had an amazing series of awards and promotions. She was the first woman to serve as a 3-star officer in the U.S. military. She was the first African-American woman to command a U.S. Navy ship. She was the first admiral selected from her class from the Naval Academy. And she was the first female graduate of the Academy who was selected for flag rank. But going even beyond that, she was the first female 4-star admiral in the Navy. And when she was made 4-star admiral, she also became the vice chief of naval operations, the second most powerful position in the U.S. Navy. From the U.S. Navy that did not want her to even come into their academy when she was young. She made her way to that place and that time, and after retiring now, she's teaching at George Washington University, and she's on the board for IBM, continuing to live from that place of knowing within her what is possible, acting on that, and experiencing a freedom that the people around her never would have given her alone. It's a powerful way to live. It's the path of true freedom. Knowing what we know, that wisdom God plants within us, and living from that place. It makes all the difference. I'm so grateful to be celebrating freedom with you this weekend, friends. Bless you.